Hello, friends. What would you be willing to do to help a stranger or an animal? Today, we'll tell you a story that might be hard to believe, but it is very real nonetheless. Mark was on his way home from work late at night when he heard a plaintive squeak. The streetlights weren't enough to discern the source of the sound. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and started inspecting the road in front of his house. Mark found some tiny, hairless animal. He looked around, hoping to find the baby's mother. However, the street was virtually deserted. The man hoped that the animal's mother would come and get the poor baby, so he waited around for a while, but no one showed up. It was obvious that if he didn't take the poor creature home, it would face certain death from hunger, cold, or being run over by a car. Sighing heavily, Mark picked up the animal and started examining it. The creature resembled a rat with particularly structured paws. In the warmth of his hand, the little creature quickly calmed down, curled up, and fell silent. Hoping not to catch any infections, Mark carried the tiny creature home to take it to the veterinarian in the morning. At home, Mark found a dropper in the medicine cabinet, took some milk, and tried to feed the blind baby. He then put it to sleep in a box. The next morning, Mark stopped by the vet clinic before work. He showed his find and was taken aback by the vet's reaction. "Why did you save it?" the vet asked sternly. Mark was caught off guard by such a question. It wasn't like he expected a reward for rescuing the animal, but he certainly didn't deserve such condemnation either. "It's a gray squirrel," the vet exclaimed, as if accusing the man of something. This statement might have made sense to someone familiar with the subject, but not to Mark. Seeing the confusion on Mark's face, the vet gave him some recommendations on caring for the animal. "Do some research about gray squirrels and make the right decision," he advised in parting. Perplexed, Mark took the animal with him to work. He was a pharmacology scientist specializing in contraceptive research. His colleagues in the office were delighted when they saw who the man had brought with him. While they admired the squirrel and took turns feeding it, Mark began to search for information. It turned out that gray squirrels were brought to Britain from North America in the 19th century. The new species quickly spread across the island. As the animals weren't afraid of humans and could comfortably settle in urban parks, trees near private houses, and even on the streets. The browser displayed thousands of photos of adorable squirrels in feeders, on branches, and in falling leaves. Then Mark added the word harm to his search query and was instantly overwhelmed with information. Gray squirrels turned out to be a nightmare for England. They were larger and more aggressive than the local red squirrels and thus drove them out of their territories, stealing their food and throwing newborn competitors out of their nests. Even those individuals that didn't show aggression towards other squirrels were still harmful. Almost all gray squirrels carried a virus called squirrelpox, which caused many deaths among the red squirrel population. It also soon became clear that they were causing irreplaceable damage to the forests by stripping the bark off young trees. Oak, beech, chestnut, and plane trees were particularly affected. Most of these trees eventually died. The man found articles that confirmed cases of humans contracting rabies after being bitten by these animals. There were many stories of people describing the aggressive behavior of these animals and showing wounds on their hands. Mark glanced in horror at the peacefully sleeping squirrel. Who did he take in? Now it became clear why the veterinarian was so unhappy that Mark rescued the creature, but killing it still wasn't an option for the man. Of course, he could have taken the animal back where he found it, but Mark didn't like that idea either, as he would be dooming the squirrel to death by starvation or being torn apart by stray animals. It clearly would be inhumane to do so. The man firmly decided to nurse the squirrel to health, but he knew that he needed to come up with a solution to make sure it didn't hurt anyone. The man spent the following day searching for information and talking to zoologists, ecologists, and other specialists. Mark became so engrossed in the process that one fine day he found himself having lunch with a renowned ornithologist. You might be wondering, what did birds have to do with squirrels? It turned out quite a lot. "It's a disaster," the scientist complained to Mark. "Birds that stay in England during the winter often die of hunger. Enthusiasts across the country install thousands of bird feeders. We buy hundreds of tons of seeds to feed the birds, but each year more and more of them die. The gray squirrels climb into the feeders and steal the food. They destroy the nests, drink the eggs, and can even attack adult birds to drive them away from the feeders. Isn't anyone trying to deal with this problem? Mark asked. They are. There's a permit for shooting these animals, and their meat is even used in food. But shooting them doesn't seem to solve the problem, the ornithologist continued. They still reproduce twice as often as the birds. If only we could contain their population expansion. At that moment, an idea popped into Mark's head. It was his job. He was developing contraceptive pills. They could help. He involved every zoologist he could reach in solving the problem. Initially, when people heard Mark speak about contraceptives for squirrels, they didn't take him seriously. The man was nearly ready to give up, fearing that it was a bad idea not worth any time and effort. But whenever he held the baby squirrel in his hands and fed it with a dropper, thoughts of the contraceptive pills didn't seem so wild anymore. The baby grew stronger and already had its eyes opened. Mark shuddered at the thought of the animal's possible future. He would raise and nurture the creature, and then, when he released it into the wild, the authorities would shoot it as a particularly dangerous pest. Mark stormed the scientific community for days, and eventually, it yielded results. The idea was first supported by animal rights activists and vegans who opposed killing animals. Concerned citizens joined them. Then, journalists showed interest in the idea, and only then did scientists give it their approval. And finally, the government allocated funds. Work was in full swing. In just a couple of months, Mark and his team developed the necessary medication. It was a contraceptive that affected the reproductive function of both males and females. The results exceeded all expectations. There were no side effects, and the animals felt great and completely ignored the breeding season. Mark's team celebrated the successful completion of the project. It was a breakthrough. If scientists could stop the uncontrolled reproduction of squirrels, the medication could then be applied to any introduced species that posed a threat to local inhabitants, such as rabbits in Australia or cats in New Zealand. Great plan, concluded the government representative who came to review the project results. But how do we feed these pills to gray squirrels? It was impossible to catch all the animals, but they couldn't just scatter the medication as other animal species would take it. Mark's entire team was now pondering how to solve this issue. Unfortunately, it didn't look like they could find any solution. The man returned home feeling dejected. As soon as he sat down on the couch, the rescued squirrel jumped right onto his head from the bookshelf. It had grown and now had a gray coat and a fluffy tail. The little creature scampered on his head and quickly descended onto the couch. The squirrel looked at the man as if demanding something, then hurriedly ran to its plate. Mark got up to pour nuts into the feeder, and the creature immediately hopped with joy and started eating. In fact, the squirrel could already be released into the wild, but Mark hesitated. He believed that within a day or two, he would find a solution to his problem, and the government would prohibit the shooting of squirrels. Then he would take his little friend far away from the city, plant it on a large tree, set up a feeder nearby, and bring it nuts regularly. However, days turned into weeks, but there was no significant process in the man's work. He needed to come up with a device that would deliver the medication exclusively to gray squirrels and prevent other animals from getting it. Meanwhile, the squirrel grabbed a nut and jumped onto a gigantic ficus tree standing in the corner of the room. The squirrel skillfully balanced on a thin branch. Mark thought that the squirrel would soon grow and break the ficus. Gray squirrels are heavy. Before he could finish his thought process, it turned into an idea. He needed engineers. Mark spent half of the night trying to design a trap mechanism himself, but only ended up more confused. The young scientist spent the next day looking for specialists and explaining his idea. They needed to design a feeder that wouldn't scare the squirrels and would have doors that only allowed animals weighing as much as an adult gray squirrel to enter, while birds or lighter red squirrels wouldn't be able to open the door. Designing the trap took several weeks and many test runs. Unexpectedly, the rescued squirrel was the one to help. Since it had reached the weight of a red squirrel, it acted as a test subject, thus speeding up the process. The feeders turned out to be surprisingly effective. Scientists tested them in multiple forests and achieved the desired results. The feeders had a weighted door that, theoretically, no other animal could open. Only 2 mice managed to get inside once, but according to the scientists, it was just a coincidence. In areas where red squirrels cohabitated with the gray ones, the feeders were equipped with a special plate at the entrance, which detected the animal's weight and triggered a mechanism that opened the door only for the heavier individuals. Thus, gray squirrels indeed came to the feeders and ate everything, including the contraceptive pills. The shooting of animals was suspended. Mark couldn't bring himself to part with the squirrel for another week, but soon, with a heavy heart, he brought it to the nearest forest. It was hard for him to let go of the squirrel he'd been raising for several months. But the wild creature moved onto a tree, then jumped onto a branch of a neighboring one, and soon disappeared into the canopy. Mark wished the little creature good luck. At least he did everything he could to ensure that the animal wouldn't suffer from humans or cause harm to any other creatures. Well, that's all for today, friends. What do you think about this story with gray squirrels? Let us know in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.